Game over, man. Game over.
Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to episode 610 for November 11th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, as we are getting nearer and nearer to the end of the year. It is crazy.
It's the busy time.
We are mid-November already. It is absolutely wild.
It's almost Thanksgiving, almost the best holiday.
Yeah, it's almost the best holiday. We've talked about this before. I pretty much see this as one massive holiday, an extension of each other, Thanksgiving and Christmas. Easily my two favorite months of the year, at least in terms of holiday and seasons. Now, I live in South Florida, so as one could imagine, it's still hot as hell here. However, and for those on the video, you'll see that I'm rocking one of our InSession Film hoodies.
You must have the AC cranked right now.
I keep the AC this time of year, especially. I keep it lower than I probably should have, just so it gives off that feeling of it's kind of colder outside, and we're transitioning to the kind of fall winter weather. So even though it's still like 91 degrees when I step outside midday, when I'm in my house, it's that fall winter weather that you love this time of year.
I can only imagine that if you were to compile all of the electric bills from everyone that lives in South Florida, the ones with the highest bills are from the people that actually moved to Florida as opposed to being from there. Yeah,
that's probably true. And I know my wife isn't always thrilled about it, especially because she hates the cold. That's why we live here.
I was gonna say, because this is her stomping ground, right? She's probably used to this.
Yeah. So she has to indulge me because I get quite nostalgic this time of year. I get the most homesick this time of year. And I need that Michigan wintry feeling. And so I keep my house.
It is a cozy feeling.
The AC is my friend. I have my own weather machine.
You're
what that is.
Your own meteorologist. You're creating your own weather patterns inside your house.
Exactly. At any rate, we hope everyone is doing well as we near the end of the year. Lots of stuff to talk about. We will have reviews of Anora and Blitz this week. Talking a little Sean Baker, a little Steve McQueen. It's all very exciting.
Big stuff.
For this episode, however, we of course going to get into some interesting box office talk, especially given the narratives that we dove into last week. And there were some fascinating narratives that we talked about.
Yeah.
So we'll see if those trends continued this last weekend. There's some Star Wars news to get into. There was the new trailer for Mission Impossible that came out today. We'll talk about that as well. And there's this little film from one Clint Eastwood that is coming out. Who knows if it'll ever see the light of day, because for some reason, Warner Brothers, despite the great reviews and positive word of mouth, Warner Brothers is like, nope, we're sweeping this under the rug.
Well,
because
guess
we
what,
hate
JD?
movies and are anti-art.
Guess what? It's playing near me. It's finally playing near me.
That is so exciting. I'm so envious of you. I can't remember if I said this on last week's main show or maybe it was one of the reviews. I can't recall. But I could have seen it last weekend. It was playing about an hour from where I'm at. I don't know if it's still there or not. It's in West Palm. And look, I tried to avoid West Palm because
it's West Palm.
I guess, I was trying not to fall under the despair that entrapped me this last week that I talked about in our review episodes. However, there is a certain president that is taking over this country come January, and his headquarters is in that area. So I tried to avoid it like the plague.
I think that's fair. So I have to correct myself, though. Your number 2 is no longer playing in my area. So I did miss the opportunity. It was playing. It was
Yeah.
playing for about. It was actually in my
It was
area
like
for
a
about
week.
a week. Yeah,
It was a week. Yeah,
but
'cause
it
I
was,
saw
but it was
that
like
Warner
15 minutes
Brothers-
down the road. I just never got to see it.
Yeah, I saw the news that they were decreasing the amount of theaters that it was in. So I am assuming that I lost that opportunity as well. I would not
probably.
have been able to go last weekend anyway, even if I did try to navigate my way through Trump territory. And I did not really want to do that, but I would have done it for Clint Eastwood because the man deserves my attention.
He deserves his
But-
flowers. He will not make another movie after this one.
I know, exactly. Last weekend, though, I had the Miami Film Festival, so I was an hour the other way in Miami engaging in the festival, which was a great time. I really enjoyed it, but
Good,
the
good.
timing just did not work out, so I was not able to get to see Juror number 2. All of that to say, hopefully that film reaches our eyeballs at some point before the end of the year. Who knows when or how that'll
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
But using that as inspiration, Brendan and I are going to do a ranking of Clint Eastwood's directorial films. And we're going to do a consensus ranking as we've done with several other directors previously.
Yeah. I think we should
And,
also make clear with this, because including Juror number 2, which you and I have not seen yet, obviously,
Yes.
Clint Eastwood has directed 41 movies. That's,
Yeah, that's
a
a
lot
lot.
of movies.
Yeah.
We have not seen all of them. We have to be clear about that, especially some of his earliest films, but we've seen most of his works. So I think in this case, we're going to try and do a consensus top 10 as opposed to a full
Yes.
ranking of his films.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the films that I would say collectively that most people would consider his best work, those films we've absolutely seen.
Of course. Yeah.
It's some of those kind of mid to lower tier films are the blind spots.
He's got some small films that I do think are pretty underappreciated. We may talk about them as we get to that segment.
For sure. So that is the show this week. Let's go ahead and jump into our weekly box office is the parade on or off segment. So winning the weekend in its third weekend was my boy Venom.
That's what I thought.
Tom Hardy taking the box office with another $15.9 million. And that makes its total gross domestically 114, worldwide 393. So that film is doing fairly well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Sony's feeling venomous. They still have the
they're
venom
feeling-
pumping through their
feeling a little
veins.
venomous. Absolutely. I love that my beloved Venom is doing well at the box office. Coming in at number 2. Do you want to take a guess?
Well, let's go back and I guess educate our listeners and our watchers once again who may not have listened to our last main show, episode 609. But during our box office talk on that episode, you and I speculated that we thought the top 2 was going to be Venom: The Last Dance and The Wild Robot again. And I'm still standing by. I've not seen the results. Like I'm actually hearing these for the first time. I have not had the chance to go on and actually look at these on Box Office Mojo or whatever publication they might be on right now. My guess is that The Wild Robot still came in second place.
Yeah, and for further context, the reason that we speculated that might be the case is because The Wild Robot in its sixth weekend last week, it rose 10%.
Yeah.
Not declined. It rose somehow 10% from the week previously.
Yeah.
Which is crazy for your sixth weekend. Absolutely.
Yeah. Especially for a film
insane.
that is already on VOD, like we talked about.
Yes.
Families are
Yes.
going to see this movie. They can easily pay the $20 premium and save money by watching it at home.
Yeah.
But they're going to the theater. Or at least
going-
we're still seeing
Yeah.
some theater trajectory for it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So at number 2, it is not The Wild Robot.
Oh, dang it. I was hoping that it would be.
And we talked about this. I posed that this could possibly happen. I could see it despite the limited marketing. I could see this happening. Heretic, the horror film from A24, comes in at
Okay.
$11 million domestically,
Okay.
another 2.5 internationally for a total of 13.5.
Okay.
Not
okay.
that's not terrible.
It's not
Not
terrible.
terrible at all. Especially
What's the
you know,
budget
I
on
can't-
that film?
I was just about to say I wanted to look that up because I can't imagine that it was a whole lot, right? Let's see here.
According to Wikipedia, which obviously, maybe not the most trusted source, it says, quote, under 10 million.
Under 10 million.
Unquote. Yeah.
Okay.
Which
Yeah.
could mean anything.
That could mean anything.
Yeah. Either way, that's a good opening for a movie like that.
That's a great opening for under 10.
Yeah.
Again, whatever that means.
Yeah.
$8-9 million, perhaps.
500,000.
500,000.
It's not 500,000.
Who knows?
There's no way.
Yeah.
You don't get Hugh Grant for a movie that costs $500,000.
No, I would guess somewhere in the 5 to 10, maybe in that 7 to 10 range.
I think it's on
would
the
guess.
upper side of that, but that would be my guess as well.
So we'll say 7 to 10. Maybe we're wrong. And if that is indeed true, 13.5 in your opening weekend.
That's respectable.
That's not bad at all. That's quite good. So
yeah,
Heretic off to a good start. I am hoping to become one of those that adds to its revenue this week. I do want to try to catch that if I can. In third place, the best Christmas pageant ever. Close to Heretic, actually. That's at 10.7.
I had a hunch that wouldn't do horribly. I didn't think it was going to take the box office at number 1, at least domestically speaking. But I had a hunch that it was going to really weirdly cater to maybe the Hallmark crowd, I guess. And that's a pretty big market. So I guess I'm not too surprised to see that.
Yeah, that's not terrible on a budget of 10 million as well. So
okay.
Making its money back as far as production goes. There's also the marketing cost, so it's got to do a little bit more work to fully be successful, but a good start for that kind of movie. So those two are really close to each other at the domestic box office. At number 4, now this is where the Wild Robot comes in, but don't be mistaken just because it's at number 4. This is still impressive. After jumping 10% last week, it is only down 11.2%, which is to say weeks 5 and 7 are about the same. That's crazy.
Keep in mind, this means that this movie, The Wild Robot, has been holding a top 5 position for almost 2 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know offhand, I'd have to look at every single week in succession, but I think it was somewhere in that top 5 every single week since its release. I think it at least landed somewhere between 1 and 5.
I would have to imagine that is the case.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. That is absolutely insane. So that brings it to domestic 230, worldwide 292. It's not destroying the box office. It's not doing Inside Out 2 kind of numbers. But I do find it impressive that it is, for 2 months straight, it is in that top 10.
Yeah.
And people are still going, despite, as you noted, it is out on VOD. And I do imagine that it is doing well in that space simultaneously. Obviously, we don't have those numbers, but one could assume, because it's been on that premium on demand for at least a month now.
I think it's at least a month, maybe 5 weeks, honestly.
Yeah.
Time does fly for sure.
Yeah, because it went to that premium on demand fairly quickly after those first few weeks in the box office.
Yeah,
at
first I wondered if it was just one of these cases that people at home didn't necessarily know it was available on VOD just yet. So maybe that's why they went to the theaters, but the fact that they kept going to the theaters, I can't believe that it's been 5 weeks for that secret to get out, right? If it even was to be called a secret. But certainly proves that this movie has legs enough that I think we're going to see a Wild Robot 2 at some point. I think that's pretty much guaranteed.
It's still in over, even if just briefly, still over 300, over 3,000 theaters. Yeah. So it is still being played quite widely at the moment.
Yeah.
Which means these theaters are happy with that film and the returns that they are getting.
It is the holidays, right? Especially Thanksgiving, Christmas coming around the corner. If families want to take an excursion to the movie theater, they're going to need something to take their kids to. And I mean, what else is there? The Wild Robot is certainly sort of the scapegoat for that in a way, right? And you're not going to take your kids to see Red One, are you? I don't
Well,
think that's
I
going to
don't
be the
know.
case.
My oldest wants to go see it. I might have to make an excuse.
Oh
to
gosh,
not
I
go.
am. I don't know. Obviously, I haven't seen the movie. I can't judge, but judging by the marketing, I'm sorry. I'll simply say that.
And that's the thing. Like, I think it is one of those movies that will appeal to kids and that younger demographic and parents who are in my position, and there might be many of them, maybe begrudgingly will have to take their kids to go see that movie. So I can still see it doing fairly well. We'll find out next weekend, but that's about the only competition. It'll be the week after, as we get closer to Thanksgiving, when Wicked and Gladiator 2 come out.
And then Moana 2 after that.
And then Moana 2 after that. Yeah, that's where the Wild Robot and some of these films that have been around a while, they'll start to.
That's when they'll
fall
just
a
disappear.
little bit.
Yeah,
they'll disappear at that point. Yeah.
yeah.
But that's still pretty wild for a 2-month run. Next week will be 2 months for the Wild Robot in theaters, and the fact that it's still in that top 5 had a fairly strong 6.6 this last weekend domestically, which again, as I noted, that's very similar to its week 5 run. Just crazy, absolutely crazy. And just to round out the top 5, Smile 2 comes in with another 5.1 as it's there in that 5th slot, which brings its domestic to 60.5 and a worldwide of 123.7. So
I still
Smile
haven't
2?
seen it yet.
I know. I do want to see it if I can.
Yeah.
I also want to note Conclave, which came in at number 6. And I want to note Conclave because we did talk about it last week. In its 3rd weekend, only drops 18.1%. So it brings in another 4.1 domestically for a worldwide of 21.7. So that film has been quite successful at the box office. And that's been really exciting to see.
Yeah.
Like those kind of movies doing fairly well. And again, I noted Anora last week, and I want to bring it up here again because it gets into 851 more theaters.
Yeah.
It increases its output from last week as a result, of course, which, it's hovering at 2.2 for this last week, and a total of 7.2 domestically, worldwide 12.5. Which for that film, it's going to be a major awards player, of course.
Yeah.
That film, I think, is going to end up being quite successful.
That's a good
real
early
for
start.
Anora.
That's a good early
start.
start before the awards buzz starts to bring more, casual moviegoers to the theaters. Because right now, most of us who are going to see Anora are people that are mostly in our circle, as well as those who, who might follow that type of film, that are interested in that type of movie. But the marketing around its awards buzz hasn't started yet. So that's going to drive it later on.
And it's only playing in 1,100 theaters, which is not a huge release. I imagine that as the award season goes on, it might trickle out a little bit more.
Is that even considered wide by that point? I thought,
I'm not sure what the parameter is.
I'm not sure what the definition is. I could have sworn I heard that it was at least 1,500 theaters to be able for it to qualify as a wide release, which means in this case, I guess it's still technically in limited release. So I don't know.
Yeah, which, if that is true, if it is technically in a limited release format as it stands, 12.5 as a starter is
not bad.
You could do a lot worse.
You could do a lot worse.
You could do a lot worse than that. So I do think Neon is in a good position there with Anora. I think they
have a good early start. They know what they have. They know they have a hit on their hands, or at least an awards hit on their hands.
Absolutely. So that is the box office for this last week. I am real curious to see how things continue next weekend. Does the Wild Robot at its 2 months mark, does it end up in the top 5 once again? We'll find out, as Red One is the big release coming this weekend, and I don't know how much of a dent that's going to do. We'll find out.
Man, I feel like that could do really well, or no one's going to go see it. That's the kind.
between, yeah.
I feel like that's not like if we find out that lands at number 4 or 5 on the box office, domestically speaking, at least, I will be very surprised. I would be very surprised if it falls somewhere in that middle ground.
Yeah. I don't know how early those projections come out as far as the tracking goes.
Yeah.
Are those numbers even available? I honestly did not even think to look that up beforehand, so
Let's see.
I'm not really too sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It looks like from what I'm looking up, Red One has already opened overseas.
Yeah, it has. I did see that. It's done
Yeah.
$28 million overseas already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I did see that. But that doesn't, like, I don't know if that's going to translate
That doesn't
to
that doesn't really
domestic,
mean
though.
anything for the box office growth. I mean, general moviegoers are not going to see, hey, this movie made money in Japan and China, so we're going to go see it. Like, that's not
Yeah.
the narrative that it's going to start.
I don't know. But that could also be suggestive of what I said earlier
Mhm.
of kids, forcing their parents to take them to see this.
Yeah, I
Which
guess.
could be
Yeah.
the case. Which could be the case. I highly doubt Sam is alone and
Oh,
wanting to
I'm
see
sure
this,
he's
so.
not. Yeah, I'm sure he'll probably enjoy it too.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll talk about that next week. And let's go ahead and transition to a little bit of Star Wars. Everyone's favorite topic these days. Everyone is in agreement that Star Wars is in tip-top shape. So
You ever think about doing stand-up comedy, JD?
Yeah.
You might be pretty good at that
Absolutely.
sarcasm. Yeah.
Okay, so Star Wars episodes 10, 11, and 12. That is 3 films, by the way. I know some out there struggle with math. And look, admittedly, I am one of those. I'm not the greatest mathematician, but I can count episodes 10, 11, and 12. And maybe that is a joke lofted at Star Wars Theory and his nonsensical fan base. Episodes 10, 11, and 12. So that is 3 films reportedly in the works. Simon Kinberg is writing the trilogy. So let's talk about this. Do we think
Where do we start?
do we think this is going to be the start of a new saga? Because in that deadline report, some insiders think it'll be the start of a new saga instead, moving away from the Skywalker of it all.
Yeah.
Or do we think that the planned Rey movie, which we talked about a couple weeks ago as, is this film even going to come out? We were dubious if that would even be a thing. So, but there's been a lot of talk about, okay, that's actually going to be episode 10.
Yeah.
Will be the planned Rey movie that'll kick things off as far as this new trilogy goes. So what do you think? Where do you see this going?
Well, you forgot the main question that we have to start asking ourselves. The big question being, is this going to even happen?
Yeah, that's a great point. I should have started there because that is ultimately where we left off the last time we brought up Star Wars.
And then the follow-up question is, if it is going to happen, how long until Simon Kinberg leaves the project?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
We should have just kicked things off there because Disney and Star Wars, I guess, to regurgitate what we said the last time, they love to have these announcements. Although, to be fair, this was not Lucasfilm. This was not Disney making this announcement. This was a Deadline. I believe it was Deadline. Had a report come out that Star Wars episodes 10 and 12 are in the works. There has been no official announcement, to be clear. However, if we are to assume that Deadline and their reporting is accurate, for the sake of argument, let's just say it is accurate and that episodes 10, 11, and 12 are in the works. To Brennan's point, is this really going to happen? Is it going to come to fruition? Is Simon Kinberg going to stay with the project all the way through? As I noted a couple of weeks ago when we brought this up, I am at that point where I need to see it to believe it. Because every single time something is reported in the news, officially or otherwise, and inevitably that project falls apart.
I know. We have to prepare ourselves for nothing. basically.
Yeah,
but
let's
I guess
not get too much into a frenzy
Yeah.
here.
But I guess for the sake of this conversation, let's just play devil's advocate. Let's assume that this is happening, and let's assume that Simon Kinberg is the person to spearhead this new trilogy. Now, based on that Deadline article, I guess it's not confirmed that it is officially episodes 10, 11, and 12. It's just a new trilogy that we know. It might be episodes 10, 11, and 12. It might still be episodes 10 and 11 and 12, despite kicking off a new saga, right? Or it might not carry any episodic tie to the original 9 movies, right? We just know it's a trilogy, and that apparently Simon Kinberg is the writer and producer and essentially, quote unquote, showrunner of what this trilogy is going to be. He's not directing them. That's a very clear distinction. He's not directing them. So he's not Dark Phoenixing this or anything like that, which that's another conversation to have. He was dealt a bad hand with that one.
Let's be a little kind, okay? I am pro Dark Phoenix here, okay? I am pro Dark Phoenix.
That movie's bad. I'm not a
terribly
fan.
underrated.
I'm not a fan. But he was dealt a bad hand. I don't really blame Kinberg as much for how that movie came about, as opposed to all the things that led to the drama behind that movie. But anyway, if Simon Kinberg is the one to spearhead this, I'm kind of mixed on that choice, if I'm being honest. Not because I don't think he's talented. I think, if anything, he probably got picked because of his association with Star Wars Rebels, which many people would agree is among the best things Star Wars has given us over the past decade, right? That's what most people would agree upon. And if that's the reason why, I understand it. I do think that Star Wars as a property is at a point that it needs to generate some type of rejuvenated excitement in the property again, right? And I don't know if a name like Simon Kinberg is that person, not because he can't do it, but because I just don't think people see him as that person, right? I think Lucasfilm is at a point where, with regard to Star Wars, if they are going to announce a new trilogy, I'm just going to throw a name out there. I'm not saying I want this individual to be the guy that does it. I'm just saying they need to make an announcement like, oh, listen, Brad Bird is going to spearhead a new Star Wars trilogy. Everyone would lose their minds, right? Especially if it came true. I don't know if Simon Kinberg has that same level of, I'm curious about Star Wars again. I'm just not sure if that's the name to really do it. I trust he'll be able to help spearhead something pretty good, especially given some of his track record. But I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on this. I'm not feeling the excitement if this ends up being true. Big if it ends up being true.
If it's Simon Kinberg, I do think it depends on which Simon Kinberg we get, because there are films on his resume that I do champion, that I do really like. And, we can perhaps debate his involvement, especially as a producer. It's very likely that he didn't have much to do with those aforementioned films, but he did write X-Men: Days of Future Past. I think is excellent. That for me is,
it's a good movie. Yeah, good movie.
Easily the best of the X-Men films. It's not even close as far as I'm concerned. Now, you're right. A lot of people do not like Dark Phoenix. I will say though, and maybe this film is every one of those memes you see on social media of all of the knives being pointed at you and this is your take. What's hilarious about Dark Phoenix to date, this is the most liked review I have on Letterboxd, is my thoughts on Dark Phoenix from
You give it like a 3 out of 5 or something, right? Which is not even the most praising of reviews. It's kind of a middle of the ground thing.
I think his writing is the best thing about that movie. And honestly, I don't think it's close. That is a film that is thin. in a larger story. It's thin in exposition. It's thin in action. But what I love about it is that it is exclusively devoted to moral debate and asking a lot of questions that characters have to wrestle with in a real way. And I do kind of love that. Like, in a lot of ways, it's barely an X-Men movie. Like, to market it as an X-Men movie is almost disingenuous. It's mostly a drama with these existential themes on morality that I love. And it creates internal conflict with those X-Men characters. And I think as an existential drama, I think that's where that film is at its most effective, and why I would give it a 3 out of 5, and where I would champion his screenplay there. I think the Bryan Singer of it all, the X-Men of it all, that's where that film really falters quite heavily.
Yeah, and I think that's really what hurts it, because I think if you look at that film and just take its script in a vacuum, there's potentially something there. It's in many ways, it's the performance of that script. I think every actor in Dark Phoenix is bad. I don't think anyone gives a good performance in that movie. There's a huge disconnect there just in the execution. But I will grant you, from what you're saying, it is going for something. On the page, it is trying for something more philosophical. I do respect it for that. And that's why I often say with that movie, maybe Simon Kinberg was just dealt a bad hand. Because I think I remember hearing how Fox basically kept forcing him to make changes mid-making of the movie.
Yeah, which
constantly. Yeah. And for someone like a Simon Kinberg who had never directed a movie before, of course that's going to lead to a messy disappointment. There's just no way around that.
Yeah.
So I kind of pity him in many ways with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I will disagree with Brendan on the performances. I think mostly they're pretty good, and I think are kind of a merriment to the screenplay, because for all of the pondering that is in the screenplay, a lot of that film is simply cut to a reaction of a character and letting them non-verbally react to those questions. And it's McAvoy, it's Fassbender, it's Holt, who I think are all excellent in those movies. So I don't have an issue with the performances, but I do think the editing, the action, which is so secondary in that film. And that's where I very much do agree. I think that's probably, where it feels directionless. The studios have their fingers in the cookie jar, all those things. That's absolutely where I very much do agree. But I would take that film 1,000 times over the vacuous, mindless blockbusters we get all the time. So I will die on that hill. Weirdly, I know it's Dark Phoenix. I think it is way better than people give it credit for. Now, that is to say,
okay,
there's also Apocalypse in there, which is terrible all the way through. and Kinberg wrote that one as well.
I kind of like Apocalypse. I like it more than that first ever X-Men movie.
Man, I can't get on board.
Well,
Apocalypse is abysmal.
I think that first X-Men movie that Bryan Singer directed does not hold up at all.
Yeah, I disagree. I think that one, and that's another one that's more character focused than action focused, which is probably why I like it. By the time you get to Apocalypse, they're trying to world build beyond what they were really capable of, and it just does not work. I think Apocalypse, I guess that's the thing. Yeah, like the worst of them.
I've always liked the X-Men movies when they start to feel more like cartoons, and maybe that's just the thing. Like I feel like we just have different relationships to the aesthetic choices that some films make over others, and I think that's maybe where I respond to the goofiness that is Apocalypse. That's a goofy movie. That is a weird, kind of stupid movie. I kind of respect that.
I just don't think it commits to it though. Like, I think it wants to have the same tone as its previous films, and doesn't recognize how goofy it is.
It's confused. The best moments for me are the ones where it tries to veer away from what worked about Days of Future Past. Yeah. It's trying to replicate that success while also going in a more, 1990s X-Men territory, right? It's trying to fuse those things together, and it doesn't work. It is a messy movie by design, but I at least appreciate the silliness that it was finally trying to go for.
Look, all of that to say, when you look at Simon Kinberg's resume as a writer, at first glance, it does not look very promising. And I do mostly share those reservations.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot here that, leaves a lot to be desired. But I don't know. I think there's a level of enjoyment, fun that I do get with some of them, which is why I don't know if I'm as low on him as a lot of others too. Like, for example, I think that Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movie is a lot of fun. The X-Men movies, as I just mentioned, I will champion those. So yes, there's a lot here that's not great, but there's enough here that I do enjoy, at least superficially. So as that transitions to Star Wars, does that give me hope that the next Star Wars movie or trilogy would be great? The answer to that would be mostly no, but I think there could be fun to be had, because Kinberg's movies, I wouldn't classify any of them as great. Like, these are, except for Days of Future Past. That one I think is truly fantastic. One of the best comic book movies of the last 10 years. The rest of them, even the films I do champion, I wouldn't say they're great, but I have fun with them. Where things pivot for me, or what brings me more hope than anything, is his involvement with Star Wars Rebels. Because Rebels, I think, is some of the best Star Wars we've seen to date, period. I don't care what kind of medium we're talking about here. Rebels was phenomenal, and he was one of the key creators of it alongside Dave Filoni. Now, Filoni gets a lot of the credit, and he did spearhead so much of that show, so he does deserve the credit. Kinberg was one of the creators, served as an executive producer, and is familiar with Star Wars through that show. Again, to his level of involvement, that is perhaps debatable. But if he's able to bring the ethos of that show to this trilogy, and you couple it with the fun that you get with his best work as a writer, now that does give me a little bit of hope. It's not the best solution necessarily. Like, it's not going to give me, I'm not through the roof excited, but I think there are worst outcomes I think there are worst possibilities than Kinberg, but it depends on which kind of Kinberg. Again, going back to that, because if it's Apocalypse Kinberg, then I'm throwing. in the towel
as much as I defend Apocalypse, I don't want to see that Kinberg involved with Star Wars. I think those sensibilities don't mix. So I'll agree with you there. Even if I like Apocalypse as a movie more than you, I like it more as an X-Men movie than I do as a movie. But with Simon Kinberg, I do find myself maybe having a two-sided argument with his involvement going forward with this trilogy, because on one hand, we know that he is producing and quote unquote writing this trilogy, but we don't really know what that means. Like, what's the extent of that? Is he just doing what, let's say, the sequel trilogy needed from the get-go, episodes 7, 8, and 9? Someone to create a blueprint, and then they get new filmmakers to come in and then take it into more artistically sound directions. So let's say, hypothetically, the sequel trilogy had someone like Simon Kinberg involved to spearhead the blueprint of that trilogy. Then J.J. Abrams comes in. Perhaps it's a case where J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan still co-write the script with Simon Kinberg. So it might not be his sole screenwriting credit. Well, it could be a case like that, where it's a shared artistic vision, but maybe the storyboarding and the initial design maybe started from Kinberg, which allows a vision to actually feel like it's coming into the fold, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's really what this is to have a centralized figure create that blueprint. And if that's the case, he might be a good person for that, to at least get something started from the ground up before a more artistically sound individual comes in.
Yeah, that is an interesting perspective, and one that is perhaps the most hopeful here, because again, when you look at just his producing credits, now what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Executive producer titles, oftentimes
money
they
coming.
don't mean anything.
Yeah.
But again, for the sake of argument, and to play devil's advocate, let's just say that he did have some hand in the project. But when he isn't writing and he's just producing, you have films like X-Men First Class, which is arguably the best of them. I will still go for Days of Future Past, but First Class.
Yeah, First Class
also
is my
rules.
baby, but I
Also
think
great.
most people really like it.
Branagh's Cinderella is the best live action Disney film to date. Chappie, I will go to bat for Chappie. That's another one.
That movie's
I quite
weird.
love.
I like that movie.
It's really great. The Martian, the Deadpool movies, Logan, Death on the Nile, A Haunting in Venice, and a few others. Like, honestly, his producing credits when he's not writing is the best part of his resume.
Yeah.
and again, I don't know what that says about him. I don't know.
Well, I guess that gets to the other point. Like, I feel like we can't really make any generalizations here, given Simon Kinberg. He's all over the place. I don't even really know where his talents end and his other talents begin. Like what defines him? Yeah,
it could just be pure coincidence that he's attached to those movies. They end up being great, and he gets credited as a producer. But I don't know. Maybe he's the one bringing on the talent, letting the talent develop these projects, and he's just good as, in that producer leader role, just kind of divvying out the work. And if that is the case, then maybe this is the best spot for him to be in, where he can hire the writers and maybe he can co-write with other writers. You bring in a director and you just spearhead a vision through the trilogy. And if that's his role based off of his resume I'm looking at here, maybe that is the best spot for him. And
maybe almost treating him like a Kevin Feige-like kind of person for this trilogy in particular, because as we've seen with Star Wars, at least with regard to their movies over the past 5 to 10 years, Kathleen Kennedy, great producer, maybe not the greatest studio head, and maybe needs more people underneath her to be able to, I guess, facilitate these other creative projects.
Especially,
and maybe that's what his job is.
Yeah, especially the Star Wars work. That has not been the best part of her career. No. She's been a great producer throughout her career for decades, but her Star Wars work has left a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
Especially in recent years. And I will defend to death JJ doing The Force Awakens and Rian Johnson and The Last Jedi. Honestly, I think she made the right call with both of those names. I think both of those films are fan-freaking-tastic. The problem is she had no idea how to conclude that trilogy. And she had no idea what the reaction to The Last Jedi was going to be. Completely caught off guard. Did not anticipate that at all. And there are always going to be unexpected things that happen. It's how you respond to them that defines you. And she did not respond to that well. Did not respond to it well at all. Ended up folding and
course correcting, listening to the Reddit fans.
Yes.
Basically making a movie that was based on Reddit theories.
Yep. Which obviously wasn't great. Wasn't great. So it is unfortunate how things ended up playing out. And maybe that's why, if Kathleen Kennedy is going to maybe take a back seat and simply lead from afar, let Kinberg come in here and kind of manage this trilogy and bring in maybe a director for all three of them. Or if you're going to bring in 3 different directors, at least there's going to be a plan in place. And, maybe he'll co-write the screenplay for all 3 of them. I don't know. However it looks out. But I think once we know more information, maybe that's when we can have a definitive thought here. All of this is vague, so we're just speculating.
We're just speculating
for fun, but
But if we continue to speculate even further, I will say the I guess the theory / hypothesis, whatever word you want to use that's more fitting here, the idea that this Rey movie has been having some issues because it's potentially getting morphed into episode 10, if this is going to be that, that does make sense. That makes a lot of sense to me, because there's a lot about that story that feels like it could potentially be a new trilogy in continuation of the Skywalker saga.
Yeah.
And
I completely agree. And I think there's a path here where they can have their cake and eat it too, in the sense that you kick off episode 10 with Rey. And for those that missed the show a few weeks ago when we brought Star Wars back up, I am absolutely championing Daisy Ridley. I think she's really great. She's had a fan-freaking-tastic 2024. And I've always really liked Rey as a character. Maybe underratedly so. She's one of the best things about that trilogy. And I wanted to see this Rey movie. I really did. I wanted to see more of Rey. And if they are going to continue this next trilogy with her, I agree with you. It makes a lot of sense. And here's the thing, even though they did shoehorn her into the whole Skywalker, Palpatine of it all.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that this next trilogy has to be about those things. You can create a new trilogy that is separate from the whole Skywalker of it all, despite her lineage, and just make it about something else. There's something else going on in the galaxy. There's a new villain that has taken over, whatever that looks like, and she is leading the charge from the Jedi perspective. And it doesn't have to be about her being a Palpatine or that she runs into the next Skywalker.
Yeah.
Like, you can make it completely separate.
Maybe at some point, if you want to do something that I think most fans were hoping to see the Rise of Skywalker do, maybe in this, 15 years? Because it's supposed to be a 15-year gap between Rise of Skywalker and when this proposed Rey movie was going to take place. Maybe in that time, she chose to reject the Skywalker name for some reason. So there's possibilities there to recontextualize some of the things that people did not like about the Rise of Skywalker, myself included. So like there's room for that.
Which would make sense, right? Because she clearly doesn't want to be a Palpatine anyway. Right. And was one of the major forces that ended up destroying the whole Palpatine hive.
Right.
If you will. Or whatever that was.
Yeah.
So I don't think she would want to take on that name anyway. And let her throughout this new trilogy, as much as it can be about something completely different from the Skywalker Palpatine of it all, from a dramatic perspective, from an individual identity perspective, I think it would be fascinating to just see her morph her identity, whatever name she chooses, if she chooses anything besides Rey, that becomes her, her journey emotionally is figuring out what her identity is going to be away from Palpatine, because that doesn't define her. I think that would be interesting. Personally,
I agree. Yeah.
Like, I think there's an opportunity here for them to just move away generally from especially Rise of Skywalker, but in general, the whole Skywalker Palpatine derivative stuff we've seen so many times.
Yeah.
And create something new. I think you can have your cake and eat it too here. Well,
that's what I was just going to say. I think you can make something completely new while still being episodes 10, 11, and 12. Because I feel like if they are going to make a new trilogy that is in continuation of this timeline in some way, without it being a literal Skywalker saga story, I feel like, just given the branding, the trademarking, the iconography of Star Wars, you probably still end up calling it episodes 10, 11, and 12, even if it is still like narratively a bit more disassociating from those 3 movies before, or those 9 movies beforehand, right? I think you can still do that. I wouldn't be surprised if they do that.
Well, and that's the thing. When you look at the last 3 movies for 7, 8, and 9, until they shoehorned the whole Palpatine thing at the end of Rise. It
I mean,
was
yeah,
doing that already.
The Last Jedi ended by saying, "Yeah, we're done with the Skywalkers." Right?
Yeah, we're done. We're moving on. Like, it doesn't matter who her parents are. Like, that was kind of the whole idea. What I love, and that's why, like, I don't think The Force Awakens gets enough credit in that, because JJ set up that mystery. He also kind of tapped into that same idea.
It was using myth and familiarity to say something new. Like
Exactly.
the whole, it was using our obsession with theme and myth and all of those things in history to tell a new side of something familiar. I'm with you on that.
Exactly. Like, The Last Jedi and what it does with that is meaningless without JJ setting it up properly the way he does and tapping into mythos.
Those two movies are pretty complementary.
They really are. Underratedly, they are.
I think like that. Like I've said this many times, and I'm going to say it again. But if somehow the narrative propulsion of those two movies were stretched into 3 movies, and that third movie ended where Last Jedi actually ends, that's a great trilogy right there.
Incredible.
Like, that could have been a great trilogy.
Agree. Yeah, totally agree. So it really was the third film where that trilogy fell apart. No doubt about it. So yeah, that is to say that precedent has been established. They have kind of done that already until they kind of messed that up at the end. So, yeah, they can absolutely do that for 10, 11, and 12. And I think they should. And I think there's opportunity to explore Rey further. And the thing is, what defines these trilogies, it isn't Skywalker per se. It's the characters involved. That's what makes these trilogies what they are. Now, of course, that original trilogy and the prequel trilogy ended up becoming defined because of the Skywalkers.
Yeah.
But we followed 7, 8, and 9 not because they were Palpatines and Skywalkers.
No, we like the new things around the familiarity. Yeah.
It's because we liked those characters.
Yeah.
Of course, they ended up bringing in Luke and all that sort of stuff. But we're at a point now with 10, 11, and 12, regardless of names, we're following them because we like Finn and we like Rey and Poe and BB-8 and all those, like the whole gang. Like, that's why we're following them.
Yeah.
And so I think you can take them in a completely new direction and have a lot of fun with it. Like, I think you have a wide open sandbox here. So we'll see what they make of it. But I think they've laid the groundwork to do something really fun and interesting. I like, a lot of this is just going to come down to the toxicity,
whether it happens.
Well, that too, but like, how do they want to pander? Because, like, we're here talking optimistically about, you can do this with Rey, and you don't have to connect it to Palpatine and the Skywalkers. You can do something new. But in reality, they want to. I'm sure there's discussion about how they find that middle ground, because the fan base is so divided, like so heavily divided. So how do you do something new while connecting it to the familiar? So the toxic fans that you antagonized with The Last Jedi, how do you bring them back?
Yeah.
Like, how do you keep them happy? Like, so does that mean you are going to shoehorn in a whole Skywalker thing again? I mean, I don't know.
Or do you just accept the fact that you're never going to make them happy and say, screw it?
Which is, and the last thought, that perfectly circles back to the central question. That debate internally for Lucasfilm is likely why these films will never come out, because they will never have an answer to that.
I think they're too scared.
So anyway, that's Star Wars. I want to talk about this new Mission Impossible trailer that came out today.
We finally got it. It's happening.
Yeah.
Next year.
Next year. First of all, I got to ask you, Brendan, because I know you had some really fun thoughts about it. What do you think about the name? The Final Reckoning. Yeah, The Final Reckoning.
Oh, the name's terrible. But I mean, we had this whole narrative that the first movie, well, not the first movie, but its direct predecessor was called Dead Reckoning Part 1. It was then rebranded as just Dead Reckoning, which means that Mission Impossible 8 was going to have a new title, and perhaps something that was still tied to Dead Reckoning as a Part 2-ish thing of sorts, while still feeling like some type of culmination of the franchise. I just don't think The Final Reckoning does that. I don't think it quite does what it seemed to suggest its goal was. Also, I just think it sounds weirdly silly. I mean, every title in this franchise is not meant to be taken seriously, right?
Mhm.
Dead Reckoning is kind of a silly title, but I feel like it kind of made sense for the type of movie that was going for. And maybe with this new movie we're about to get, maybe it will make sense. But I don't know. It just feels too on the nose and too obvious for me. Too simplified, if that makes sense.
Okay.
That aside, I think the movie looks pretty fun. Just visually speaking, it actually looks like a massive improvement over Dead
Yeah.
Reckoning. Because one of the things you and I talked about was how that movie was perhaps the first in this franchise where the action sequences looked less impressive by comparison. Even though a lot of it was done practically and authentically, there was some type of digital sheen to it that made it all look green screened or something like that. What we got in this new trailer for the Final Reckoning does look a lot more tangible. It does look like an improvement. And that's exciting to see. The movie does look exciting. And just given what we saw visually, it's hard to speculate what it's going for narratively until we actually see the film, obviously. But I do think it looks better. I'm still excited for it because I do think it looks like it took some of the things that you and I criticized as if it was listening to us and tried to hone in on those things. It does look like an improvement there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm also curious how this film tailors off Dead Reckoning. As you noted, is the name of it now, not part one. They need to fix that on Letterboxd because it's still Dead Reckoning part one.
I wonder if they make that part of the narrative. Like, what if the entity became so self-aware it created a movie with a part one into it and just or something like that? I don't know. They made it some type of meta thing.
I will say, as it stands now, so much of my thoughts on Dead Reckoning will play itself out as we get to the Final Reckoning, because in addition to some of the visuals of the film, and I do agree with you, I didn't wholly love the visual palette of Dead Reckoning. Yeah. But I also have a lot of questions about the writing. A lot of questions about the writing of that film. So I'm curious how the Final Reckoning will answer those questions. I still, as of now, have not really given a grade on Letterboxd for Dead Reckoning because I don't know where I sit on it on the whole. I think there's plenty to love.
It's to be continued for you. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, it's to be continued. It does look like they've answered the cinematography and the visual of it all. I do agree there. It looks freaking-tastic. Yeah. It looks really, really great. The use of colors in the trailer pop extremely vivid.
It actually looks vibrant this time around.
Vibrant. The whole airplane chase sequence looks absolutely stunning, and I can't wait to see that on the big screen. I assume Tom Cruise, from a performance standpoint, is going to continue because that was easily one of the best things about Dead Reckoning. I think in that film, he gave the best performance in that series since Mission Impossible 3. And how does that continue on into the Final Reckoning? Does he continue that internalized contemplative approach? And I do think this trailer seems to suggest that is going to be the case, at least to some degree. So I am really excited about that. Speaking of Mission Impossible 3, easily my favorite thing about this is, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the trailer, they are bringing back the rabbit's foot from Mission Impossible 3. I don't know how it's going to be involved. I don't know what it means. Just the fact they are invoking what I think is the best film in this whole series is very exciting to me.
You know what would have been a great title for Mission Impossible 8, or now called The Final Reckoning? If they wanted to create some type of culmination of the franchise, you go back to Mission Impossible 3 when we were first introduced to Benji, played by Simon Pegg, and he describes what this rabbit's foot is and the legend of what people saw this type of weapon to be. You could have called this movie Mission Impossible: The Anti-God.
Sure.
That hits. That hits me.
There's
That
still
hits
time
me.
to change it. You
I
don't
mean,
have to be.
I mean, they changed Dead Reckoning Part 1 like 1 year later.
Yeah, exactly. You could change it. You could totally change it. I do want to shout out friend of the show, Griffin Schiller, because he made a great point on Twitter earlier as it relates to the Rabbit's Foot. One of the best things about that in Mission Impossible 3 is that it is a MacGuffin.
Yeah.
A little bit of a red herring. It's an enigma that doesn't really matter to the grand scheme of that film. I think that's why I love that film in so many ways. So connecting that to the franchise here in the Final Reckoning, is it going to lift the facade of the Rabbit's Foot? Is it going to bring some sort of clarity as to what it is, and this is what it's been the whole time, and explain that whole thing away? He makes a really great point, and I do not disagree with it at all. I think maintaining the mystery around the Rabbit's Foot is probably the best way to go. Also, I just want it. Like, I don't care. Like, I just want it.
I guess
So
it
I'm
really,
fine with it.
It really depends on in what capacity do you get it again. Like, do you get it again in a way that satisfies your nerddom, but does it also preserve the integrity and the mystery of that thing from Mission Impossible 3? And hopefully it has
could
it both
also
ways.
be, and this wouldn't surprise me either. What if the Rabbit's Foot is just the Final Reckoning's version of him strapped to the outside of the plane?
Oh,
what if
it's
it is
just a MacGuffin?
The cold open?
Yeah. Like it actually literally is a MacGuffin. It's a nothing or something like
It's
that.
just for a cold open that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
That
I'd
it could
be okay
also
with
be
that.
that.
I'd be okay
it could
with
be
that.
completely meaningless to the Final Reckoning for all we know. That is the brilliance of the marketing of these movies. They've done that before. So, but it could be pivotal to the story. Who knows? But I will say this: you are right. It all depends on execution, how they use it. Even if they do the worst case thing, at least from a narrative dramatic standpoint, and they do kind of explain it away, I think my nerdum for it will trump my logical sense of it all.
Well, it might, and then maybe a year later you'll start to double back on that, right? When the nerdy side of the excitement starts to subside, right?
It depends. It depends. I mean, lots of nerdy stuff has never really fizzled out for me. That doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Like, I can understand that my nostalgia nerdum for it, biases my
gives you
logical
rose-colored
thinking.
glasses for it. Yeah,
exactly. But I can separate those things and recognize that from an objective narrative perspective, maybe it doesn't work. I don't know. We'll see when it, when the film comes out and how it's used in execution. But I look, all of that to say, Griffin makes a great point.
Yeah,
the enigma of it is what makes the Rabbit's Foot so compelling. Also, I just want it back.
Maybe they'll bring it back and it'll be able to have it both ways for you and for the preservation of what it meant in Mission Impossible 3. We'll see.
Exactly. But yeah, I thought that was really exciting. It was also noted earlier today that Angela Bassett is coming back for this as well. After she was in
6 Fallout. So she was not in Dead Reckoning. But she's making a comeback here.
Yeah, so she's making a comeback as well. So that is exciting. It looks really great. I can't wait. I can't wait for it.
I wonder how long it'll be. Will this one be like 3 hours?
Well, they're going to market this as the final one. I don't know if Tom Cruise will ever let that happen. I think he's just going to make these movies until he literally dies. He'll be Clint Eastwood's age and still be making Mission Impossible movies.
I'd love to see someone in their 90s hanging off the Burj Khalifa.
If anyone would do that, it would be Tom Cruise. Like that's
course
just
it would.
how he's going to live his life. But they are going to market this as the last and final one. In some ways, I kind of do hope that it is, just because I think these movies have been fantastic. They've been
Yeah,
a lot
we don't
of
want to see
fun.
diminishing returns with it.
Yeah, you don't want to see diminishing returns. Like, I have my questions about Dead Reckoning, obviously, but there's a great chance that the final Reckoning will remedy my issues there, that this film will be great on its own terms. It'll go out on a high note, and I don't think there's
final
anything wrong with
remedying.
that. Wait, do what?
I said the final remedying.
The final remedying, exactly. Maybe that should be the name of it. No, yeah, I mean, it looks great. I will say this though, because I probably said the same thing about Fallout. Like, oh, perfect ending. Like, let's just end the franchise here, and then these next two movies come out. It's like, okay, there's still fun to be
well,
had.
no one was saying that about Dead Reckoning. Oh, perfect ending. Perfect ending.
No, well, that was because that was.
I
always
know
meant
that.
to be
I know
two
that.
parts.
Yeah, it was meant to be 2 movies.
At any rate, looks exciting. Cannot wait for that one as we get to May of 2025, May 23rd. That film comes out. We do need to get to Clint Eastwood, but real fast. We want to briefly note the passing of Tony Todd last week. Was he 69? I want to say.
Yeah, he was 69. Yeah.
Yeah. Really unfortunate, but man, live, you talk about an actor that had a palpable screen presence. That was Tony Todd. Anytime he was on screen, depending, no matter the film, no matter the role, that man oozed an aura, a presence, some sort of vivid, tangible reaction out of the audience. That you always loved.
He knew how to take the most basic and rudimentary dialogue and make it sound like the most prophet-like thing that you could ever imagine. I know he's often associated with horror, primarily because of Candyman, and he's very effective in Candyman. The first thing I ever took notice of him in was that first Final Destination. Which obviously he was mostly cast in that as sort of a tribute or a callback to his work in horror and his reputation in horror.
Yeah.
But I still remember he has a very simple line of dialogue that he tells to the Devon Sawa character, the lead of that first Final Destination, when he asks, "How can you cheat death?" And Tony Todd just says, "You already proved that by walking off the plane." And it's just like the way he says it. It's a basic line of dialogue. It's really not the most poetic thing, but it is so like thrilling to hear him say that. He just knew how to make that impact, and not just in horror. I mean, I still remember seeing him in Oliver Stone's Platoon. I think he's very effective in that film. So he's been in a lot of great things, and he will certainly be missed. A really great talent for sure.
Yeah, no, he is a really great talent. I very much do agree. His work on horror has been talked to death.
Yeah.
And I very much agree with a lot of it. I caught up with, again, Candyman when the remake came out a few years ago. And man, I really
good.
like that film
It's
a lot.
good.
It's so good, and he's so phenomenal in that film. So yeah, like his stature as that character in that film, it truly is iconic. And honestly, as far as slashers go, and I do have a pretty volatile relationship with slasher specifically. Honestly, one of my favorite horror villains is probably his performance there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, there's more nuance, more thematic intrigue with Candyman than there is, let's say, Jason Voorhees, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like I don't take that for what it's worth, I guess, because I know Jason, Freddy Krueger, maybe those are more iconic, but I don't know. I prefer Candyman to any of them. So
I mean, I do love Freddy Krueger, but I do think Candyman is certainly more topical. Always has been.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tony Todd, it's great that we're transitioning over to Clint Eastwood pretty soon, because Tony Todd also had a pretty small role in Clint Eastwood's film Bird. with Forrest Whitaker playing Charlie Bird Parker, the jazz legend there, that film from 1988. And so, yeah, very versatile actor. We may even highlight him when we get to our Clint Eastwood conversation. He's been around.
He has been. And to finish my thought, because we ended up getting a little distracted there, I simply wanted to say that his work in horror should be noted. He's fantastic, deserved all of his notoriety and praise there. However, whenever I think about Tony Todd, and I don't know why, well, I guess it'll become obvious as to why, but every time his name is invoked, the first thing I think of, maybe outside of Candyman for the reasons we just talked about, but outside of that, what I immediately think him of is in The Rock.
Oh, of course, The Rock. Yeah.
It is Michael Bay's The Rock. And look, I guess to your point earlier in terms of how he delivers dialogue, because he is given some fairly campy dialogue in that film.
He's not giving good dialogue, and he makes it sound like poetry.
Yeah, he makes it like he brings a badass energy to his character, like this evil antagonistic, I'm not putting up with anyone's shit energy, which I just absolutely love. But it is the marriage between him and Nicolas Cage in that film that I will forever think of, that is embedded into the deep depths of my brain, because specifically it's the moment when he catches Cage's character and he says, I'll take pleasure in gutting you, boy, and then you immediately cut to Cage in the prison there.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like, I just love that so much.
Yeah.
So that
I'm actually glad I didn't call that one out. I'm glad that you're the one that called out The Rock, because you're certainly more of a Michael Bay head than I am.
I'm the Michael Bay head here. Yeah. I love it. Like, and I love that movie. There's so much about it that's really great. But that would have been my first interaction with Tony Todd, would have been The Rock, because I wouldn't have caught up with Candyman or any of his horror work until much later, and when I was in college.
Yeah, and that first Final Destination came out in 2000, maybe 2001, which means I would have been maybe like 12 or 13. Obviously, at an age I shouldn't be watching that, but I think I caught it on cable, which means it was edited for content when I caught it. And at 12 years old, when you see a presence like Tony Todd, he is most likely going to be the scariest thing in that movie outside of death himself, right? And he certainly left an impression on me when I saw him in that movie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, yeah, really great actor, as you noted. Will be one that will be dearly missed. I mean, a man, unforgettable face, unforgettable voice, just a vivid screen presence, and we absolutely do want to give our best to his family and friends as they grieve his loss.
Yeah.
All right, Brennan, let's talk about coffee. I love it. You love it.
Even the word just makes me feel happy.
It is everyone's favorite. And look, right now, especially as we're all really busy, it is the end of the year. Maybe you're busy at work. The holidays are also coming up. The weather's changing for a lot of people in the northern part of the United States, at the very least.
It's time for those holiday blends, I'll tell you.
It's time for those holiday blends. And that's why we love Coffee Call Out, because they source specialty great coffee from all over the world. They have great single origin coffees. They have awesome blends. And as Brendan noted, because it is November, they have their holiday blend available right now. It is my favorite coffee they have. Good. It is absolutely terrific. It is Christmas in a cup. It is so fantastic. I had some holiday blend before coming on to this episode, of course. Oh, it's just the best.
And the fact that we record these at 9 p.m. at night is why I'm laughing.
Yeah, no, it's terrific. I was sitting next to, feel free to judge me all you want, but I'm never going to change. I will always be this person. But yes, I had my holiday blend next to my Christmas tree, which is already up in my house. So it's just the best time of year. I have
for
to
you.
create winter in my house,
guess.
as I noted earlier.
I
So,
tried to tell my
holiday
wife
blend.
to put up. I tried to tell my wife to put up a giant turkey instead of a Christmas tree, but didn't win that
You
argument.
can do both. Put up turkeys. I have Thanksgiving decorations in my house as well.
All right. Well,
like
at
I
least
said,
you're doing
this
it
is
right.
all
At least
part of
you're
it.
doing it right. And of course, the great tasting holiday blend just goes so well
Yep.
with that overall aesthetic.
Oh, it's so good. So you got to get some holiday blend. Another thing you can get at Coffee Cult for a gift for someone, the coffee lovers in your life, they have a holiday loot box. What does that mean? A holiday loot box comes with a Coffee Cult mug and a 12-ounce coffee. So it is a great stocking stuffer. It's a great Christmas gift for your loved ones. Comes at a very reasonable price. You can go check all of that out at coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, call with a K. Coffeecult.com. At checkout, use our code ISF24. That code is ISF24, and you'll get 15% off at checkout. But go check them out. That's coffeecult.com, and we thank them for their support. All right, Brennan, let's talk about Patreon. One of the best ways that you can support us is through Patreon, patreon.com/InSessionFilm.
Indeed.
If you want to go check us out over there, we have a couple of different tiers that you can sign up for at Patreon. As low as $1 a month. It goes all the way up to $10 a month. And your support over there really helps out the show. One of the best perks you'll get with Patreon is that you will be you'll get access to all of our bonus content over there, exclusive to our bonus content.
Yes.
And we are currently in the stages right now of planning, recording, and hopefully releasing soon our latest bonus content, where we're going to talk about Agatha, the latest from Marvel on Disney Plus.
It was Agatha all along.
It was Agatha all along. And the Penguin, the latest from DC over there on Max. So we got Agatha, we got the Penguin. Both of those just finished, just wrapped up within the last week or so. I have seen both, and we're going to talk about them. So that will be our new Patreon bonus content. So go to patreon.com/InSessionFilm, and that will be a great way to help us out and support the show. If you want to listen to that bonus content, but you don't want to be on Patreon, or you're not on Patreon, you don't want to sign up on Patreon, that is okay. Yeah. Although Patreon is one of the best ways, if not the best way, to support the show. However, we also have that bonus content on 2 other platforms. If you're watching us on YouTube, if that's where you live and you watch our YouTube, our podcast here on YouTube, you can become a member of our channel. And when you sign up to become a member of our channel, you'll get access to those VIP episodes that way as well. Or if you listen to us on Apple Podcast, you can sign up for an Apple Podcast subscription, and you can listen to our bonus content that way as well. So if you want any more information on that, just go to InSessionFilm.com, and you'll be able to find that information there. Or you can just reach out to us on social media. We'll be able to walk you through it as well. So Patreon, YouTube membership, Apple Podcast subscription, you'll get access to all of our bonus content in those 3 ways. And for those that do that, we really do appreciate your
Thank you so much.
Okay, let's go ahead and transition to Clint Eastwood. You may have heard of him before. Pretty prolific actor and filmmaker.
He's been around.
As we noted, he has a new movie coming out called Juror Number 2.
You may have heard of it, but you can't see it.
We can't see it. Who knows? Maybe it'll never see the light of day. So we are going to do a consensus ranking of Clint Eastwood and his films, as we've done before. This is Brendan and I doing a consensus ranking. So we're going to talk through this. We're going to come to our ranking, and we'll do our top 10 Clint Eastwood directed movies. So as we begin here, Brendan, usually we count down backwards like from 10 to 1. I do kind of wonder with Clint if we should do the reverse here.
Oh, I think we should. I'm glad you bring that up, and for a couple reasons. We mentioned at the beginning of this show that Clint Eastwood has directed now 41 movies, so we can't go film by film here. That would just take too long, like we've done for other consensus rankings before. Like when we did, say, M. Night Shyamalan. He has about a third of the amount of films, maybe even less than that. So it makes for a ripe hour-long conversation we can easily have here. But Clint Eastwood also has a select handful of heavy hitters that I feel like almost everyone would agree on. I feel like we can start this conversation off by picking the top 4 pretty quickly, at the very least, maybe even the top 5. And we may even be able to agree on the order pretty quickly. So I think it's maybe a fair point to start there.
Yeah, I think that's where we need to start because his best films easily rise to the surface, no matter what ranking you look at, whether it be on a website, on Letterboxd, what we're about to discuss here. The films in his top 3 and 4 will be on everyone's top 3 and 4, most likely.
Most likely.
So, let's go ahead and start there. So specifically the top 3, maybe top 4. The top 3 for sure: Unforgiven, Mystic River, $1 Million Baby. And as a 4th, I'm assuming you are referring to Letters from Iwo Jima.
Those are my top 4. I might sound like a bit of a bandwagoner of sorts when it comes to
Hate to be
Clint Eastwood.
trite, but those are the best. Those are the 4.
I think they're the 4. And if we're talking about this as a consensus ranking, I'm okay with that. There are other movies that he has directed that at times I may like a little bit more than some of those 4. Like I mentioned earlier with regard to Tony Todd, he's in a movie called Bird from 1988. That is one of my very favorite Clint Eastwood films. But I also know that it's not everyone's. I have more of an attachment to that because of my love of jazz music. So it's more of a Brendan movie in many ways. Like there are some days that's in my top 4. In actuality, it might even be in my top 5. But I also recognize that when we look at the filmography of Clint Eastwood, a movie like even something like Pale Rider or The Outlaw Josie Wales means more to Clint Eastwood than Bird does. So I get that. But needless to say, just to circle this back to the top 4 there. Yeah, Unforgiven, Mystic River, $1 Million Baby, and Letters from Iwo Jima, I think we need to have as our collective 4 here.
Yeah, I think that's quite easily the 4 here. Unforgiven being his truest masterpiece. I would have that at number 1.
Yeah. I think it's one of the best picture winners ever.
I agree. Totally agree.
That could be in like my top 5 for greatest best picture winners ever.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's simply one of the best films ever made. Unforgiven is a true masterpiece. After that, the next 3, honestly, I think could be interchangeable. I have here Mystic River, $1 Million Baby, Letters from Iwo Jima. But to be perfectly honest, I don't have to be married to that order. I could flip any of those out.
Yeah, I have it personally the other way around. But I feel okay putting something like Mystic River at number 2 because we often talk about how filmmakers have a certain pivot point, right? Usually like a midpoint in their career when they transition into something aesthetically, emotionally new, right? They start to cover new ground. Clearly, Clint Eastwood had some great hits as a director. Unforgiven, and we'll talk about some of these other films that we also really like. But up until Mystic River, he sort of found a rhythm doing, typical crime drama capers of sorts, movies like True Crime and Absolute Power and Blood Work, which was just before Mystic River. Mystic River kind of felt like a rebirth in a way, like a new debut of sorts. It feels different. Yeah. It also doesn't feature Clint Eastwood, the actor, so there was a very different energy to it. I think given those reasons, I'm okay putting it at number 2 because it basically created a new era for Clint Eastwood in many ways.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a fair argument. Like I said, I do not have to be tied to it. Honestly, I would probably, now that we're talking out loud here, I'd probably go Mystic Letters than $1 Million Baby. That's probably where I'd be.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to put letters, go Letters, Mystic, $1 Million Baby, I'd be perfectly fine with that too.
I'm okay with that too. I think $1 Million Baby, as weird as this is to say, might be the more rewatchable of those three, just given the emotional weight of it. It's not an easy film to digest every time, but it maybe has a bit more of that classic Hollywood timelessness to it by comparison to something like Mystic River or Letters from Iwo Jima. But there is something about the craft to Letters from Iwo Jima that might slightly edge it out for me, which is why I'm okay putting it number 3 just below Mystic River, as you're saying.
Okay. So we want to do Letters, Mystic, $1 Million Baby. That's what we're going to go with officially?
Or I was actually going to say I can do Mystic, Letters, then $1 Million Baby.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Right.
I think Mystic River has more of a stamp on the trajectory of Spielberg, the director, going
totally
forward.
fair. Yeah. It definitely helped define that era for him, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So those are our 4. And I think everyone could assume those would be the 4 here, as we talked about.
Yeah.
All right. So then we get to number 5. This is where things get interesting. The next 6 films here will be debated. So that's where we'll spend most of our time.
Yeah.
So do you have Bird then at number 5?
Bird is my number 5, but I also recognize it is very much a Brendan pick for number 5.
Okay.
I'm passionate about the film. I love the film, but it's also one that, I don't know how you feel about it, but it's also one that I can maybe take a step back and realize that it might not have the same, I guess, Clint Eastwood representation, right? Like it doesn't, it doesn't help define him as a director as some of these other films that we're going to talk about. And that's, it is a very different type of Clint Eastwood experience. In many ways, it's almost like his first ever attempt at the types of movies he would start making in the early to mid 2000s, right? Like that was almost like his trial run for a Mystic River-like kind of experience.
Yeah. I mean, what I appreciate about Bird is that it does break away from the usual biopic formula. It's more impressionistic than you would expect from Clint Eastwood. And honestly, given how things have played out since then, especially I'd say from like Invictus onward, I think that makes Bird all the more fascinating to me.
Well, then that's actually a pretty good argument then. Maybe sort of, goes against what I was saying. So maybe in some ways it is a very significant stamp in his career.
I mean, I think so, because like when you look at some of like Hereafter, J. Edgar especially, even American Sniper,
those are not going to be in our top 10. We can reveal that right now.
Exactly. Like, I don't love Bird like you do. I do think he trips over his ambitions a little bit. I do think the film drags slightly, but I really do appreciate what he's going for. I do really like how impressionistic it is. Well shot, well performed. And I would take it over a lot of, let's say, Invictus onward.
I would agree. It sort of reminds me of when Don Cheadle made Miles Ahead, the Miles Davis film.
Yes,
it's a very different kind of. It's a very different kind of energy. Don Cheadle was channeling a very different vibe and a very different. It was more kinetic by comparison.
Yeah.
But both of these movies respect the almost improvisational like nature of jazz music. So the films themselves actually feel kind of loose and improvisational, and Bird's very much about that. So like the more we talk about it, I would love to see it somewhere in our collective top 10. I would. Okay. It doesn't have to be number 5. It's number 5 for me, but he's directed 41 movies. I'd be happy if Bird is just somewhere in the top 10, honestly.
Okay. We'll see how it goes, but I do think that is very possible.
Okay.
Because again, like I would probably, if I was going to rate them on Letterboxd, honestly, I don't know if I would have it, like my grade wouldn't be any different, or certainly wouldn't be a whole lot different than something like even Sully or Richard Jewell. But I think Sully and Richard Jewell are just well executed movies within the confines of what they are on the page.
Sure.
And really well performed, right? Like you have a great Tom Hanks kind of centering Sully, Richard Jewell with a phenomenal central performance with Paul Walter Hauser. That is really great. However, again, what I like about Bird is it doesn't have those confines. It might stumble, but I would take it over those two. So that is to say,
it's a riskier movie by comparison to a lot of those,
which I appreciate. Appreciate that. Definitely gives it a leg up.
Yeah. So maybe we can asterisk that one for now, with the hopes that it can make it into the top 10.
But I don't know how far we're going to make it into this conversation, because the film I have at number 5, similarly a JD movie that I don't think a lot of people have nearly this high for me, is A Perfect World.
Oh, I think a lot of people would agree with you, and myself included.
You think so?
I do. I genuinely do. In fact, I was going to say after we got done with that Bird conversation, I was going to say there are 3 movies outside of the 4 we just talked about that I think need to be in this top 10. One of them was going to be A Perfect World.
Okay, that's really interesting, because I don't know, and maybe it's because I am not looking for it, or maybe I've just missed it. I don't know. I just feel like every time Clint is brought up, I don't see that film being talked about. But maybe that is ignorant of me, and I am just missing that conversation. I am happy to be wrong, though, if people are talking about it.
I go on Letterboxd and I look at a lot of our colleagues in the film critic sphere that even we admire. There are a lot of 4.5 out of 5-star reviews for A Perfect World.
I'm happy
our good
to be
friend
wrong.
Jay Ledbetter has it that high. Sean Fennessy from The Big Picture has it that high.
Awesome.
Our good friend Mitchell Beaupre has it that high as well. So, okay. And I agree with that sentiment. I love this movie. It's actually it's one of my favorite Kevin Costner performances as well.
Yes, same. So good. I was absolutely I caught up with that film. I don't know. So it's been a while now, maybe 2014, 15 when I first caught up with that film.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it though. Absolutely loved that film. I'm with you. Costner gives one of his best performances. Really sharp from a writing and directional perspective.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So yeah, that was easily my number 5. I honestly did not anticipate the conversation going this way.
No, that was
does make it a little easier.
That was an easy one there. And honestly, even though I might prefer Bird, I know that's a me thing. That's a me thing. I think for the purposes of this collective exercise, it makes more sense to put something like A Perfect World a little bit higher. I think
I will. Okay, I will say this: if we put A Perfect World at 5, I think I'm at a point where I can concede, because I'm looking at the rest of my films here. I think maybe there's an argument that a few of them might be better than Bird, but I don't know by how much.
Okay.
Like I think we could put Bird at 6. I could be happy with that. Like I wouldn't push back. I wouldn't push back against that.
Okay, so then we have 6 of our 10 now. I think this is where it's going to get tricky, right?
Yeah.
So we have 4 more slots open. There are a few here I think we absolutely should consider having in the top 10. There's one specifically, and there's another slot that I'm, I guess, weirdly kind of okay leaving open for another type of Clint Eastwood film. Let me first say the specific one I would like to offer as needing to be in the list, and that's The Bridges of Madison County.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the best romances of the 90s, if you ask me. I love this movie.
Yeah, no, I think it's really great. I did have this in my 10. as well.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I think I had this at 8. I think I had it at 8, which is about where we're at. So I think we're at 7. So
Yeah, we have it at 7
yeah, that's
here.
fine. That's
Yeah.
I have no
Okay,
problem
that was
with
easy.
That,
That was
being-
easy.
So-
This is turning into an easier conversation than I
I
thought.
know. Like I did not anticipate that it
I
would
guess
be.
I guess we
go
overestimated ourselves a
smoothly.
little bit. Okay.
Okay.
So I threw out the Bridges of Madison County as that specific one I'd like to see in the list. Another opening, I would like to maybe include another one of his westerns if we could.
Yeah, I have one. I have one that I wanted to include as well.
The one that I'm leaning towards is the Outlaw Josie Wales.
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
That's the one.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, that's the one I actually had this slightly above Bridges, but
Okay.
I mean, they were right next to each other. So if we want to flip flop them as far as my list is concerned, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of like a 7A and 7B at this point
Yeah.
in many ways.
Yeah. That was definitely the other one I was going to try to fight for because I think that is
Okay.
a really, really good Western for sure.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
Obviously outside of Unforgiven, he has directed 3 other westerns, them being The Outlaw Josie Wales, High Plains Drifter, and Pale Rider, and I like all 3 of them.
Mhm.
But I think there's something about The Outlaw Josie Wales that maybe does the best job alluding to the things that would make Unforgiven so powerful, right?
Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
No, I think that was the film because that was like his fourth or 5th directed movie.
Mhm.
And that was the one where it's like, okay, there's something really special here. Like
Yeah.
Eastwood isn't just a great actor. He's showing great signs as a filmmaker as well that clearly over the next decade, and especially as you get to Unforgiven, and that was about a decade later, something to that effect.
Yeah.
That would, start to crystallize and show itself further. So
Yeah.
it's like one of those early directorial movies. And look, his earlier work was fine. Like High Plains Drifter, I think is a fine movie, but
Sure.
Outlaw Josie Wales showed signs of him maybe being a special
That
kind
is
of
an
filmmaker.
awesome movie. It is
Yeah,
such
it's
an
really great.
awesome movie. You mentioned some of his earliest works, which I will admit, some of his earliest films I am blind to. I haven't seen everything. Like I haven't seen Bronco Billy, for instance. I haven't seen Honky Tonk Man. Haven't seen The Gauntlet. I have seen Breezy, but it was a long time ago. I don't feel comfortable even talking about it, but I remember as a younger individual enjoying it. The earliest of his films, actually his directorial debut, I have seen, and I do really like Play Misty for me. So, and maybe we could consider that one in the top 10 by default for simply being the debut, but maybe we don't do that just yet. Maybe we see if there's anything else that we feel passionate about to include to round out numbers 9 and 10. But I did at least want to acknowledge that I do quite like Play Misty for me. I don't think it's perfect, but I do think it's good. I think the performances there are quite good, not just from Eastwood, but from also Jessica Walter. So I think there's some good things there.
Yeah, I like Play Misty for me as well. I haven't seen that film in so long though. It's like that's one I do like one of my favorite, I guess, memories with that film, although I do feel kind of bad now because the film itself is kind of vague. What I most remember about that film is watching it with my dad. Like that's one of those where my dad introduced, or maybe not introduced, like I was aware of who Clint Eastwood was, but like him and I didn't really watch movies together. Like he's not a huge movie person, although weirdly he is now. But what I love about my dad is he is like a connoisseur of the B movie. Like he loves renting those movies on Amazon. That no
Sounds
one
like
else
my
is watching. like these, and some of them are like, he's like, I watched such and such movie, and it's like this B action movie, like from Germany or something like that. Like sometimes they're international films. I'm like, I have no idea what he's talking about.
Doesn't it make
but
it
he
feel like you're
consumes
not?
all of them.
doesn't it make it feel like you're not doing your job well enough as a film critic when you have your dad recommending movies that you've never even heard of?
That's what I love about him now. It's like
It's so fun.
he really loves those kind of low grade, low budget B movies that, no one sees except for him. Like that's his thing, which I just think is,
Okay.
I can't get him to watch Oppenheimer, even though I think he would love it as a history buff. But those are his movies. Like that's his jam. So I should have him write for the site because that's a whole
Oh, I
genre
would love to
of,
see that.
of
Well,
movies
your
that we
dad
don't
is our
really
head
cover
writer.
on the site. Yeah, but that's what he's watching. It's just hilarious. But like anyway, that is to say, like my dad was a huge he grew up watching westerns and he grew up watching a lot of Clint films, so he was a big Clint fan. And that's how we were able to connect. Outside of that, he didn't really, he's not much of an art fan, at least at the time as I was.
Sure.
So that is my connection to that film is I just remember watching that with him, in like one of those rare occasions. But the film itself is a little vague to me, to be honest.
Okay.
But I do remember liking it.
Okay. So maybe that's a kind of a what if at this point. Let's see if we can find anything else that we feel more passionate about to cover that 9 and 10 slot. I will admit Play Misty for me is in my personal top 10, but I'm not necessarily married to that. Maybe we'll find something that we feel is more we might find something that's more, I guess, definitive in the career of Clint Eastwood as a filmmaker. And there's one movie here that I would argue is a very definitive Clint Eastwood directed movie. It's one that I don't love as much as most others do. But I feel like when you talk about his best movies, this is one that very much represents him as an artist, and that's Gran Torino. But I think a lot of that is also his performance, because in many ways it almost feels like that should have been his swan song as a performer. It wasn't, but it almost feels like it was meant to be, and I think that's what gives the movie any kind of weight. I don't love the movie as a movie, but I love him in it. That's kind of where I'm torn, because I know it is an important one for him. It very much is, even if it's one that I don't love like most others. And it's one that I know you like quite a bit, right?
Yeah, I do like the film. I'm not wholly married to it like I am his best work. But you are right that it is quite defining in a lot of ways as you think about that character and in the internet age anyway, the memes and gifs that it has inspired over the years. The character is very memorable for sure. Yeah. And there are lines of dialogue that are really memorable. And I think it's really well shot. I think it is really well performed. So like I do like it, but it's also one of those movies where if people are on the complete opposite side of where I sit with the film, I do understand that as well. Yeah. So like I don't think it's great by any stretch of the imagination, but I think there are things to really appreciate about it. But it is kind of interchangeable with a lot of like anything post Letters to me is fairly interchangeable. Gran Torino simply it has his performance for sure. Yeah. I think it is admirable in some ways. I don't think the execution is always there. But if you were to ask me what is his best movie since Letters from Iwo Jima, there's not really anything that stands out to me. So like I think it's just kind of debatable.
I do really like Changeling. And I think I like that one more than you.
That's the film that you and I will probably be the most divisive on, because I really do not like that film at all. Okay. So that's other than maybe Gran Torino, because obviously we just disagree there. But like those two films, and funny enough, those are the two that follow Letters from Iwo Jima.
Yeah, and they came out the same year in 2008.
Yeah, just to make it all the more fun.
But yeah, like I do think that Gran Torino is maybe a smoother movie than most of what came after it, but I kind of give movies like Sully and even to an extent American Sniper some credit for at least having more provocative ideas on their minds. Like they're at least trying to go for some type of conversation starter, right? I mean, even a movie like the 1517 to Paris, that is a failed experiment, an absolute failure of an experiment, but it's a very interesting experiment. And that's not to say I think it's better than something like Gran Torino. It's not. But I kind of admire the intrigue of those movies. I don't think Gran Torino is nearly as provocative as some of these other movies. I think it's a very easy movie to digest, which is maybe part of its charm. But I like when Clint Eastwood finds that merriment, where he's able to make a really compelling movie while also still being weirdly challenging. And I think his best movies have that middle ground. And I feel like he kind of lost that after Letters from Iwo Jima.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because that's the struggle for me. Because I don't find any of these films all that challenging.
I don't think the execution is. I think the ideas themselves are, but maybe the execution not so much. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, I mean, I don't find them challenging, but
okay,
I'm glad that you're able to see something there. The only one for me that is kind of there is Gran Torino. And I think maybe it is kind of the provocative angle of it, because some people find it provocative for the wrong reasons, like like misguided in his approach, and maybe that is the case. Maybe it is misguided, But I guess maybe that's why I find it interesting, because it's one of those movies where I think his heart is in the right place, but maybe he goes about it in the wrong ways. I don't know. That to me is where I do find that interesting. And that's honestly a film that, given the discourse now, I don't know. I wouldn't say that it ages well, but makes that provocation all the more fascinating to me. Any of those other films, I can't find the energy to muster that same kind of energy.
Yeah. I think maybe the provocation of Gran Torino exists because of people's readings of it, as opposed to the movie itself doing the work.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I think it is a pretty decidedly simple movie, which again, not a bad thing. I think if anything, it's the backdrop that really allows that conversation to start, which maybe that is the credit to the film.
It could be the execution of it that sparks that conversation.
Yeah. I guess let me ask you this, because I feel like we're at a point now. We're going to start just bouncing from film to film.
We're just going to go in circles.
Yeah, we're just going to go in circles. So let me ask you. So we've got our top 8. We need to fill out the top 10.
It's just figuring out these last 2.
Yeah. Just to recap, we've got Unforgiven, and in order from top to bottom: Unforgiven, Mystic River, Letters from Iwo Jima, $1 Million Baby, A Perfect World, Bird, The Bridges of Madison County, and The Outlaw Josie Wales. Let me ask you, what would you like your 9 and 10 to be? What is your 9 and 10 on your personal ranking?
Well, okay. So my 9 and 10, and I didn't really bring this up because I do feel like I'm on an island here, and that's perfectly fine. But I am higher on Flags of Our Fathers more than a lot of people are, or more than most, I guess is maybe a better way to say that. I think it is a really good compliment to Letters from Iwo Jima. It's not quite as seamless. I very much do agree with that. But I think as far as a thematic flipping of the coin goes, I think it is quite great. And I love what he's attempting. I think it is much more provocative than something like American Sniper. I think the questions that he poses are fascinating. The characters, I think, are equally compelling. I think there's a lot to like about Flags of Our Fathers, even if the execution isn't quite always there. And that's a film that I would probably champion of kind of these kind of lower, or like mid to lower tier Eastwood films, until I catch up with some of my blind spots, or even catch up with Play Misty for Me once again.
Yeah.
Until I have that conversation, or I have I'm able to see those films. That's the film
Yeah.
on my personal list where that I would champion. But I understand that I'm a little bit alone there, which is why I didn't really bring it up much here.
I'm torn because the execution of that film is the thing that really hurts it for me, as you're talking about. It's the fact that it doesn't really feel like a movie at all, and then it sometimes does, and then it doesn't, and then it does, and then it doesn't. There is a messiness to it, that a messiness that I don't think Letters from Iwo Jima has, but I do think it works very well alongside Letters from Iwo Jima. I think it almost works as a great prelude or a great setup for the actual movie that Clint was going to give us, right? Which is why I don't think I'm opposed to putting it in our 10, just mostly by association with Letters from Iwo Jima. I almost feel like that complementary nature allows it to be there, even if I think he has directed movies that I like more. So like if we can't find anything else, I think that I'm okay with that.
The best thing I can say about it, maybe the simplest thing I can say, especially for those that have listened to us talk about films like Black Hawk Down, for example. I feel very similar about Flags of Our Fathers to Black Hawk Down.
Yeah.
The execution might not be there. I do agree. But I think what's great about Flags of Our Fathers, like Black Hawk Down, is that it might pit itself on the outside superficially as U.S. military war propaganda, when at its heart, it is quite the antithesis.
It's anti-propaganda.
It's anti-propaganda.
Yeah. I do think thematically it is very much a partner with something like Black Hawk Down. I don't disagree with that. If anything, it really just comes down to the execution of it being a movie. Black Hawk Down, I think, is a great movie.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Outside of just that, and I don't think Flags of Our Fathers is a great movie. Letters from Iwo Jima, I think, is a very good, if not, no, that's an excellent movie. Not even very good. That's a great movie. And that's where I'm torn on Flags of Our Fathers, but I can also argue.
Again, that's why I didn't bring it up, because I know a lot of people feel that way. I would argue that it's really good.
Okay.
I think even as a movie, it is messy, but I still think it's really good, especially when I look at the rest of his filmography. That, even including Gran Torino, like the rest of his films.
I like it more than Gran Torino. Yeah, I'll definitely
like
say
it
that.
just like anything. You go down the list: Invictus, J. Edgar, Jersey Boys, American Sniper,
it's
Sully,
better
all of
than
them.
all of those. It's better.
They don't spark anything out of me. Even if they're fine, like I like Sully, I like Richard Jewell, like not all of these films are bad, but I don't know, like it's not provoking much energy out of me, if that makes sense.
No, I'm with you.
Flags of Our Fathers does. Even in its messiness, I'm still emotionally compelled and thematically riveted by that film. It's at least doing something in me.
Yeah, that I can agree with. Before we maybe settle the debate on Flags of Our Fathers, because I'm kind of leaning towards us including it, because I do think it's a more significant movie for Clint Eastwood as a director than some of these others. Is there anything pre-Mystic River that you also really like that we haven't talked about yet?
That is a great question.
Of course, those that you've seen, because as we mentioned, we do have some blind spots here.
No, I mean, I think honestly, I think we're at a point now where I would say either, even though I'm not quite, my mind isn't quite there on Play Misty for me, I would say that I think it's fair to include that here, because I know that was really well received, well reviewed. A lot of people still really like that film. So that, or maybe, or maybe
question.
High Plains Drifter, because I do like that film. I know that was well received from a lot of people as well.
I do like that one more than Pale Rider, from what I remember.
Yes, like those, I'd say it would be those two. Yeah, because I'm trying to look and forgive me, I'm trying to look and talk at the same time here. So
You're good. You're good.
Like, yeah, yeah, I'd say one of those two. And if you're higher on Play Misty for me, despite where I'm at, I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah,
I have no problem with that.
I slightly am. That might be my personal number 9. And given the fact that it was his debut, I think that does add some significance. I'm taking a look at the films that I have seen pre Mystic River that I also really like. I did mention I did see Breezy, and I remember liking it, but that was quite a while ago. I feel like it wouldn't be fair for me to argue for it until I watch it again.
I think like if we want to do Play Misty for me at like 9,
mhm.
and then do either Flags or High Plains at 10, I think that sits well with me. Depending on how you feel, I guess.
I'm kind of okay with that. Well, first thing I was going to say was I do have a soft spot for Space Cowboys. I actually really like that movie, but it's not one of his 10 best movies. So I'm okay. I just wanted to acknowledge that I do really like Space Cowboys. I think that movie kind of rocks.
Okay.
But I do think, like, personally, I'm okay putting Play Misty for me at number 9 like that. And if I were to pick the number 10 film, I think I might lean towards High Plains Drifter by a slight margin over Flags of Our Fathers, even if I also think that Flags maybe has more of a significance given its complementary nature to Letters from Iwo Jima. So, I don't know. I like High Plains Drifter more. I'll just simply say that.
Okay. I mean, I like them both. I like them both. So, I mean, flip a coin, I guess. I mean,
10A
if you want to
and 10B.
include, like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I personally will probably prefer Flags of Our Fathers, but again, I am totally willing to acknowledge that is a me movie. And
What are
not
your
necessarily the consensus?
What are your thoughts of just simply lumping Flags of Our Fathers with Letters from Iwo Jima as a double billing? Because they were a double bill.
They were a double bill.
But
like
one of
the
them
idea.
one of them is significantly better than the other.
Well, that's the thing. Like, while I personally am kind of okay with that, because I do feel about them the same as a lot of kind of two-parters go. But like, I also don't want to undermine the brilliance that is Letters from Iwo Jima on its own terms.
That's fair.
You know what I mean? Because like that film on its own is masterful. It really is one of his very best movies, obviously. And Flags is kind of like, I think it's great, but it's great for me. And it's not great for a lot of other people.
Let's do this then. I feel like this is a great way to cap off this conversation because Clint Eastwood has his defenders, especially for movies that maybe most don't go for. Let's go ahead and put Flags of Our Fathers as our number 10, just to, I guess, give him a defense that he doesn't often get. Just to kind of change things up a little bit. We already have two of his westerns in the top 10 here. I feel like that's enough to suggest we probably also really like High Plains Drifter and even to an extent Pale Rider.
For sure.
I think this is a great way to.
Those would probably be the next two if we were to continue this.
Perhaps,
Right?
in some variation. This is where things get kind of tight. But I think the 10 here, if we end things with Flags of Our Fathers, it's a good 10 film representation of Clint Eastwood. Like just of Clint Eastwood. And I think that's really a great way to conclude this exercise, maybe.
Okay, I like it. So just for clarity, the 10 we have: Unforgiven at 1, Mystic River, Letters from Iwo Jima, $1 Million Baby, A Perfect World, Bird, The Bridges of Madison County, The Outlaw Josie Wells, Play Misty for Me, and Flags of Our Fathers.
I think it sounds pretty good.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can live with that. So that's our consensus ranking of the great Clint Eastwood. I am curious if and how, and it's by all accounts, juror number 2, after we do see it, that will probably bump
that could be our new number 10.
Flags of Our Fathers out of the 10.
Yeah.
So I look forward to that. I look forward to getting into that after we do see it. Who knows when that'll be.
Yeah.
Okay, I
when
think
it airs
that'll-
on Courtroom TV.
For sure. That'll do it for this week's episode. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, rather. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're more active on Blue Sky now as everyone is making the move over to there. Just search InSession Film. You'll find us on all those platforms. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com as well. As I noted up front, we have 2 reviews. We got Anora, we got Blitz coming this week. So stay tuned for that. We will have a new Chasing the Gold. We'll have more Women in Session out this week as well. We are getting toward the end here. It is very, very exciting. Some great reviews up on the website at InSessionFilm.com as well that I encourage everyone to go and check out. Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I'm just simply looking forward to movies at the end of the year. We've talked about this a lot. I don't know if our favorite films of the year are going to be reflective of the awards conversation as much this year as previous years have.
Yeah.
But the movies we're going to talk about this week, Anora and Blitz specifically, regardless of how I or even we feel about them, I think they are great conversation starters. I think there are great talking points there. And if anything, I'm looking forward to the conversations we're about to have. So hopefully they become good ones that we can publish by the end of this.
I agree. I think there's going to be some fascinating conversations to be had about both of those movies.
Yeah.
And I'll just say vaguely, because I don't want to give too much away here, I do think both of them play into the ethos of what you just stated there as far as how award season might look differently than what the InSession Film Awards will look like. I'll leave that as a tease, I guess. But there's certainly plenty to discuss with both of those movies. Anora, I'm especially looking forward to getting into because Brendan and I are huge Sean Baker fans. Really love his work. The Florida Project, Red Rocket especially. Tangerine, I think, is also really quite great.
Yeah.
So I've been a big Sean Baker fan. Anora is interesting given our history with him. I think there's going to be a lot to talk about. I'm curious if we can kind of decipher some of that movie. Should be a lot of fun. And then there's Steve McQueen and Saoirse Ronan, and that's a great, fun
you
little
can't go wrong
duo
with
as
that.
well. So, all right. Well, with all of that said, stay tuned. We got a lot going on, and it's only going to get more busy as we get toward the end of the year. So,
Indeed.
with all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Clint Eastwood. Good at his job. Really good at his job.
Pretty good. Great and then not.